Hello, everyone. I'm Mr. Edison, and I'm here to guide you into a peaceful slumber. If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where you're from and what time it is as you unwind. So settle in, get cozy, and let the relaxation begin. Growing up in Southern California, I was always aware of the unique geography that surrounded us. The Inland Empire, where I spent my childhood, sat about 60 to 90 miles east of Los Angeles, nestled near the foothills of the San Bernardino Mountains. It was a place of stark contrasts, where the urban sprawl of the city gave way to rugged wilderness within a matter of hours. One of the things you often hear about Southern California is that you can go surfing and skiing on the same day. While it sounds like an exaggeration, with light traffic it's actually possible. This proximity to both ocean and mountains shaped my childhood in ways I'm still discovering. My father, whom I'll call Jack, was what you'd call a true mountain man. It's hard to overstate just how at home he was in the wilderness. The mountains weren't just a place he visited. They were an integral part of who he was. Throughout his life, he had spent countless hours exploring every nook and cranny of the local mountain ranges. He knew every back road, every service road, every trail like the back of his hand. He even possessed a specialized bump key that allowed him to unlock Forest Service roadblocks, a fact that both impressed and slightly unnerved me as a child. Jack's love for the mountains was something he was determined to pass on to me. When I was young, he enrolled me in the Boy Scouts, hoping I would develop the same wilderness skills and appreciation for nature that he had. Despite my inclination towards city life, I'm grateful for the experiences scouting gave me. The time spent in the wilderness with my father and fellow scouts taught me invaluable lessons about survival, teamwork, and respect for nature. Looking back now, I realize that those early experiences in the mountains also exposed me to the mysteries and unexplained phenomena that sometimes occur in the depths of the wilderness. Two incidents in particular stand out in my memory, experiences that challenged my understanding of the natural world and left me with questions that persist to this day. The first incident occurred during a Boy Scout camping trip in the San Bernardino Mountains. I was around 12 years old at the time, old enough to appreciate the beauty of the wilderness, but young enough to still be awed by its mysteries. Our troop had embarked on an ambitious hike, starting at 6 a.m. and trekking until sunset to reach our campsite. It was a grueling journey, especially for some of the younger scouts, but the sense of accomplishment when we finally reached our destination was palpable. Our campsite was nestled deep in the woods, far from any signs of civilization. As was our custom, my father and I set up our tent at the edge of the camp, a good 50 meters from the central campfire. We always did this to escape the noise of the younger scouts, who often stayed up late into the night, their excited chatter echoing through the camp. That night, as we settled into our mummy bags, exhausted from the day's hike, neither of us had any inkling of the strange events that were about to unfold. The forest around us was quiet, the kind of deep silence you only find far from the constant hum of city life. It was a peaceful silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. We had just gotten comfortable, the warmth of our sleeping bags, a welcome respite from the cool mountain air, when we heard it. A sound that didn't belong, a sound that immediately set my nerves on edge. It was the click of rock against rock, coming from the ridge above us, perhaps 50 to 100 meters up from our position in the valley. Now, my father had always been a firm believer in Sasquatch, or Bigfoot as it's commonly known. While I was more skeptical, I couldn't deny that there were things in the wilderness that defied easy explanation. The vastness of the American wilderness, with its unexplored corners and dense forests, certainly seemed capable of hiding secrets from human eyes. As soon as we heard the sound, my father reached for the radio to contact another scout leader. His voice was low and tense as he asked if any of the adults had gone off into the woods. The response came back negative. Everyone was accounted for. This wasn't a popular trail, and the likelihood of other hikers being in the area at night was slim to none. With that possibility eliminated, we fell silent, straining our ears to catch any further sounds. It was then that I noticed something else, something that sent a chill down my spine. The usual nighttime chorus of insects and animals had fallen silent. The forest around us was unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation. We lay there in our tent, every sense on high alert. I could hear my own heartbeat, the blood rushing in my ears. The silence stretched on, broken only by the occasional click of rocks from the ridge. These weren't small pebbles being disturbed by a passing animal. The sounds suggested larger rocks, too heavy for an average person to manipulate easily. As we listened, the rock clicking continued, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but always with a deliberate rhythm that seemed almost communicative. My father whispered to me, his voice barely audible, "Remember what I told you about Sasquatch? They're not violent, but they are territorial. This could be a warning." His words did little to calm my racing heart. I had grown up hearing his stories about Bigfoot, about the mysterious creatures that supposedly roamed the deep forests. I'd always half believed them in the way that children believe in magic and monsters. But now, lying in that tent with the strange sounds echoing around us, those stories took on a new, terrifying reality. The rock clicking continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, just as we thought it might be over, we heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of rocks being flung off the ridge, crashing down into the valley below. The impact suggested these weren't small stones, but sizable rocks being thrown with considerable force. The valley had a drop of about 30 to 50 meters, not a sheer cliff, but a steep slope. The strength required to throw rocks that distance was far beyond human capability. As each rock crashed down, I felt my heart rate spike. What kind of creature were we dealing with? Then, as suddenly as it had started, the commotion ceased. The forest fell into an eerie silence once again. We lay there, barely breathing, waiting for the next sound. Minutes ticked by and nothing happened. Just as we began to relax, thinking perhaps whatever it was had moved on, we heard something that defies explanation to this day. The sound of a tree being ripped from the ground. It came from about 75 meters away and 30 meters above our elevation. The valley's acoustics carried the sound clearly to our tent. I could hear the ripping of roots, the cracking of wood, the shower of dirt and rocks as the tree was wrenched from the earth. It was a sound of raw, primal strength, a display of power that sent waves of terror through my body. In that moment, huddled in our tent, with only a thin layer of fabric between us and whatever was out there, I felt a fear unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just the fear of physical harm, but a deeper, more primal fear, the fear of the unknown, of forces beyond our understanding or control. The tree-ripping sound was the last we heard that night. After that, silence reigned, broken only by the pounding of my own heart. Neither of us slept much, both too keyed up by what we had heard. When dawn finally broke, it was a relief to see the familiar light of day streaming through the tent fabric. The next morning, we hiked up to the ridge to investigate. What we found only deepened the mystery. There were large rocks that had been cracked open, as if smashed together with great force. We found an area where it looked like a tree had indeed been uprooted, though the tree itself was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps the most unsettling discovery was the tufts of thick hair we found caught in the bark of several trees. The hair was coarse and long, unlike anything I'd seen before. When we got close to examine it, a rank odor assaulted our noses, a smell like garbage left too long in the sun, mixed with something musky and animal. The ground was too hard for any clear footprints, but we noticed a pattern of broken branches on the surrounding trees, up to about 8 feet high. Whatever had passed through here was large and didn't seem to care about the trail it left behind. As we stood there, surveying the scene, I felt a weight settle over me. The evidence before us suggested something far outside my understanding of the natural world had been here. Something large, powerful, and intelligent enough to use tools and communicate through sound. My father and the other scout leaders exchanged meaningful looks. Without much discussion, a decision was made. We had disturbed something here, crossed an invisible boundary. It was time to move on. We packed up camp quickly and quietly, careful not to alarm the younger scouts who remained blissfully unaware of the night's events. As we hiked out that day, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. The forest that had seemed so welcoming just a day before now felt alien and threatening. I knew that whatever had been on that ridge last night was still out there, watching, waiting. This experience marked a turning point in my relationship with the wilderness. It opened my eyes to the possibility that there were things out there beyond our current understanding. While I never became the true believer my father was, I could no longer dismiss the stories of strange encounters in the woods as mere fantasy or misidentification. The incident also taught me a profound respect for the unknown. We had entered a domain that wasn't ours, and something had made it clear we weren't welcome. It was a humbling reminder of our place in the natural world, not as conquerors or masters, but as guests in a realm far older and more mysterious than we often acknowledge. As we drove home from that camping trip, the mountains looming in the rearview mirror, I knew I would never look at them quite the same way again. They were still beautiful, still awe-inspiring, but now they also held a hint of something else, a reminder of the thin veil between the world we think we know and the mysteries that lie just beyond our understanding. Little did I know that this experience was just the first of two. Encounters that would challenge my perception of reality and leave me questioning the true nature of the wilderness I thought I knew so well. The second incident occurred several years later when I was in my late teens. By this time, I had accompanied my father on countless hikes and camping trips. I had honed my wilderness skills, becoming more confident in my ability to navigate the challenges of the mountains. Yet nothing could have prepared me for what we encountered on San Bernardino Peak. This particular trip was special. My father was determined to reach the summit, where he had spread his own father's ashes back in 1987, just a few months after I was born. My grandfather, a World War II veteran, had been a larger-than-life figure in our family lore. He had served as a B-17 Flying Fortress mechanic in England, often volunteering for dangerous missions as a gunner when they were short on men. He had even flown in gliders by night into France to repair downed bombers. His legacy loomed large in our family, and this pilgrimage to his final resting place held deep significance for both my father and me. We had attempted to reach the summit several times before, but my father, now in his 40s and struggling with high blood pressure, had always been forced to turn back around 8,500 feet. This time, however, he was on a new medication and felt confident he could make it. There was a determination in his eyes that morning as we set out, a fire that told me nothing would stop him from reaching his goal this time. The day dawned bright and clear, promising perfect hiking weather. As we began our ascent, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. This wasn't just a hike. It was a journey to connect with our family history, to pay respects to a man I had never known, but whose influence I felt every day through my father. As we climbed higher, the air grew thinner and cooler, but the sun beat down on us with increasing intensity. Above the clouds and smog, the atmosphere takes on a different quality. The air feels cleaner, crisper, but the sun's rays are more direct and punishing. It's a combination that can lull inexperienced hikers into a false sense of security. In our eagerness to reach the summit and our desire to travel light, we had made a critical error in our preparation. We had only brought 2 large water bottles, severely underestimating our needs for the challenging climb ahead. As we pushed on, the water in our bottles dwindled alarmingly fast. About 3/4 of the way up the mountain, we faced a crisis. Our water was gone, and we were still a considerable distance from the summit. We stood at a literal and figurative crossroads. Should we push on, risking dehydration but potentially achieving our goal? Or should we turn back, admitting defeat but ensuring our safety? It was at this moment that my father remembered something. A mountain spring, he claimed, was not far from our location. With the confidence of a man who had spent his life exploring these mountains, he suggested we detour to refill our bottles. We had water-purifying tablets with us, so the risk of waterborne parasites wasn't a concern. Buoyed by this new hope, we left the main trail and began picking our way down a less defined path towards where my father believed the spring to be. The going was rough, the terrain uneven and treacherous. Every step felt like a gamble, our footing uncertain on the loose scree and hidden roots. After what felt like an eternity of careful descent, we reached the location where the spring should have been. But instead of the life-giving water we desperately needed, we found only a dry depression in the rock. The spring had run dry. The disappointment was crushing. We stood there, staring at the barren ground, the reality of our situation sinking in. We were now off the main trail without water and had expended precious energy on a fruitless detour. The situation had gone from challenging to potentially dangerous. With no other choice, we began the arduous climb back to the main trail. Every step was a struggle. The sun seemed to beat down even more fiercely, and the air felt thinner than ever. I found myself sucking the sweat from my shirt just to moisten my parched tongue. My father, despite his determination, was clearly struggling. His face was red and his breathing labored. As we finally regained the main trail, the full gravity of our situation hit us. We were alone on the mountain. We hadn't seen any other hikers all day, and there had been no cars in the trailhead parking lot when we started. We were at least 1,000 feet up from where any help might be found, and both of us were showing signs of dehydration. We stood there, catching our breath and trying to come up with a plan. The summit, our goal, seemed impossibly far away now. Yet the thought of descending without reaching it, of failing to complete this pilgrimage to my grandfather's resting place, was equally daunting. It was in this moment of indecision and growing despair that something happened that I still struggle to explain to this day. As we stood there weighing our options, we heard footsteps coming down the trail from the direction of the summit. At first, I thought the dehydration was causing me to hallucinate. But as I looked at my father, I saw the same look of surprise and confusion on his face. Someone was coming down the trail towards us. As the figure came into view, I felt a strange sense of unreality wash over me. It was an older man, with grey hair and a short grey beard. He wore a blue bandana wrapped around his head and carried hiking poles. But what struck me most was the way he moved. Despite the rough terrain, he seemed to glide down the trail with an ease that bordered on the supernatural. The man came to a stop in front of us, a serene smile on his weathered face. "Lovely day, isn't it, fellas?" he said, as casually as if we had bumped into each other on a city street rather than high up on a remote mountain trail. My father, always quick to recover, managed a chuckle. "Did you sleep up there the night before, or are you just the fastest hiker alive?" he asked, a note of friendly banter in his voice that didn't quite mask his bewilderment. The old man's response was cryptic, delivered with a mysterious smile. "Oh no, I've seen what I've come here to see, and I'll be off shortly," he said. The phrasing struck me as odd, and I found myself committing his exact words to memory. His piercing gaze swept over us, taking in our obvious state of exhaustion and distress. "You boys look pretty thirsty," he observed. "You ran out of water? The mountain can be quite deceiving on a hot day like this, right?" Before my father could respond fully, the old man continued. "And you both went down to that spring over yonder and found it dry," he said, pointing unerringly in the direction we had just come from. My father and I exchanged stunned glances. The spring was well hidden, and my father had often boasted that probably no one alive besides him knew of its existence. The old man's knowledge of our predicament was unsettling, to say the least. He continued, "Well, I've got about a gallon of water here in my pack. Probably not enough for you to summit today, but enough to get you hydrated and down the mountain." As he spoke, he produced a gallon jug of water from his backpack. The sight of it made my parched throat ache with longing. "Drink it in good health," he said, handing it over. "And come prepared next time, okay? I don't reckon I'll always be around to save your asses." We took the water gratefully, thanking him profusely. As we drank, savoring each life-giving sip, the old man watched us with an enigmatic smile. Then with a nod and a grr sound, he continued down the trail, moving with that same uncanny grace we had noticed earlier. After filling our bottles and drinking our fill, we began our descent, both disappointed at not reaching the summit, but relieved to be heading to safety. As we rounded a bend that led to a series of long switchbacks, we expected to see the old man ahead of us on the trail. This section was above the tree line, offering an unobstructed view for quite a distance. But to our astonishment, the trail was empty. There was no sign of the old man anywhere. Given his age and the difficult terrain, it seemed impossible that he could have descended the switchback so quickly, even with his unusually fluid gait. My father and I exchanged looks of disbelief. Without a word, we quickened our pace down the mountain, a shared sense of unease spurring us on. The encounter had left us both shaken, confronted with something that defied logical explanation. To this day, my father and I remain convinced that the man we met on the mountain was more than just a fellow hiker. Some might call it divine intervention, others a hallucination brought on by dehydration and altitude. But the water he gave us was real enough, and it undoubtedly saved us from a potentially dangerous situation. We eventually did make it to the summit on another trip, this time well prepared with ample water and supplies. As we stood there, honoring the memory of my grandfather and taking in the breathtaking views, I couldn't help but think of our mysterious benefactor. Had he been some kind of guardian spirit watching over those who ventured into these mountains? Or was there a more mundane explanation that we were simply unable to see? These experiences in the mountains, the unexplained sounds in the night during our camping trip, and the enigmatic old man on San Bernardino Peak have stayed with me over the years. They serve as reminders of the mysteries that still exist in our world, even in places we think we know well. The mountains, I've come to realize, are more than just geological formations. They are keepers of secrets, realms where the boundaries between the known and the unknown can blur. My father's deep connection to these wild places suddenly made more sense to me. It wasn't just about the physical challenge or the beauty of nature. It was about the possibility of encountering something beyond our everyday understanding, of brushing up against mysteries that defy easy explanation. These experiences have shaped my perspective on the natural world and our place in it. They've taught me that there's more to the wilderness than what we can see or easily explain. They've instilled in me a deep respect for the unknown and a humility in the face of forces we don't fully comprehend. As I've grown older and ventured out on my own hiking and camping trips, I've carried these lessons with me. I approach the wilderness with a mix of excitement and reverence, always prepared for the unexpected. I've learned to listen more closely to the sounds of the forest, to pay attention to those moments when the natural world seems to hold its breath. I've also come to appreciate the wisdom in my father's approach to the mountains. His belief in Sasquatch, which I once dismissed as fanciful, now seems to me a way of acknowledging the mysteries of the wilderness. Whether or not Bigfoot exists as a flesh-and-blood creature, the concept represents all that is unknown and untamed in our world. The incident with the old man on San Bernardino Peak has made me more open to the idea that there are forces at work in the world that we don't fully understand. It's given me a deeper appreciation for the thin line between the rational and the inexplicable, and how quickly that line can blur in the wilderness. These experiences have also strengthened the bond between my father and me. We share a secret knowledge, a set of experiences that others might find hard to believe. When we're out in the mountains together, there's an unspoken understanding between us, a shared awareness of the potential for mystery and wonder around every bend in the trail. As I reflect on these incidents now, years later, I'm struck by how they've influenced my life. They've made me more open-minded, more willing to consider possibilities beyond the readily explainable. They've deepened my respect for nature and heightened my sense of wonder at the world around us. But perhaps most importantly, they've taught me the value of humility in the face of the unknown. The mountains have shown me that no matter how much we think we know, there's always more to learn, more to discover. They've reminded me that we are small parts of a vast, complex world, much of which remains beyond our full understanding. These lessons have served me well, not just in my outdoor adventures, but in all aspects of life. They've taught me to approach challenges with an open mind, to be prepared for the unexpected, and to find wonder in the mysteries that surround us. As I continue to explore the wilderness, I carry these experiences with me. They've become part of who I am, shaping my perspective and influencing my interactions with the natural world. And while I may never fully understand what happened on those 2 occasions in the San Bernardino Mountains, I'm grateful for the glimpse they provided into the profound mysteries that still exist in our world. In the end, these experiences have reinforced what my father always knew, that the mountains are not just places of physical challenge and natural beauty, but realms of mystery and potential revelation. They are places where, if we approach them with respect and an open mind, we might just encounter something that changes our understanding of the world and our place in it. And so, every time I lace up my hiking boots and head into the wilderness, I do so with a sense of anticipation, not just for the views I might see or the physical challenges I might overcome, but for the possibilities of what I might encounter. For in the depths of the forest or on the wind-swept mountain peaks, there's always the chance that I might once again brush up against the inexplicable, the mysterious, the unknown. These are the gifts the mountains have given me, a deeper respect for nature, a more open mind, and a profound appreciation for the mysteries that still exist in our world. And for that I will always be grateful. The California desert has always held a certain allure for me. Its vast, seemingly endless expanses of sand and rock, punctuated by hidden oases and otherworldly geological formations, have a way of making you feel both insignificant and alive. It's a place of extremes, where the scorching heat of the day gives way to bone-chilling cold at night, where life clings tenaciously to existence in the most unlikely places. It was this fascination with the desert that led me and a group of friends to plan a hiking trip to Fossil Falls, just outside of Ridgecrest, California, about 25 years ago. None of us could have anticipated that this adventure would lead us into a mystery that continues to haunt me to this day. Our group consisted of 4 of us: myself, my best friend, his girlfriend, and our mutual friend. We were all in our early 20s, full of energy and eager to explore. My best friend was the most experienced hiker among us, having grown up in a family that regularly went on camping trips. His girlfriend was newer to hiking, but enthusiastic about the outdoors. Our other friend was our resident jokester, always ready with a quip to lighten the mood. As for me, I fell somewhere in the middle. I enjoyed outdoor activities, but wouldn't have called myself an expert by any means. We set out early on a Saturday morning in late spring. The drive from Los Angeles to Ridgecrest took about 3 hours, during which we watched the landscape transform from urban sprawl to rugged desert. As we neared our destination, the anticipation in the car was palpable. We'd all seen photos of Fossil Falls online, but nothing could prepare us for the reality of the place. Fossil Falls is a geological wonder, a remnant of the Pleistocene era, when water from the Owens River carved intricate patterns into the basaltic lava flow. The result is a series of smooth, undulating rock formations that look more like abstract sculptures than natural phenomena. As we parked our car and gathered our backpacks, I remember feeling a sense of awe at the alien landscape before us. The hike down into the falls was relatively easy, though we had to watch our footing on the smooth, worn rock. We took our time, pausing often to take photos and marvel at the otherworldly formations around us. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rock face, creating an ever-changing landscape of light and dark. It wasn't until we reached the bottom of the falls and entered the opening of the canyon that things took a turn for the bizarre. The first thing that hit us was the smell. It was faint at first, barely noticeable over the scent of sun-baked rock and desert vegetation. But as we continued our hike, it grew stronger. "Do you guys smell that?" my friend's girlfriend asked, wrinkling her nose. We all nodded, looking at each other with a mixture of curiosity and concern. The odor was unmistakable, the sickly sweet smell of decay. "Probably just a dead animal," my best friend suggested, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "It happens out here all the time." We continued on, but the smell only intensified. It was becoming difficult to ignore, and I could see the others were as unsettled as I was. There was something deeply wrong about that smell, something that went beyond the normal cycle of life and death in the desert. "Maybe we should turn back," I suggested, but curiosity had gotten the better of us. We had come this far, and something in us needed to know the source of that awful stench. As we pressed on, the canyon walls seemed to close in around us. The bright, open expanse of the desert gave way to shadowy, claustrophobic passages. The smell grew stronger with each step until it was almost overpowering. We pulled our shirts up over our noses in a futile attempt to filter the air. That's when we saw it. In the small clearing ahead, the ground looked different. There were several dark patches on the surface like oil slicks, but they didn't quite look like oil. The earth around these patches appeared disturbed, as if someone had been digging recently. We approached cautiously, our earlier excitement replaced by a growing sense of dread. The smell was so strong here that it made our eyes water. My best friend, always the brave one, stepped forward to investigate. "Guys," he said, his voice muffled by the shirt covering his face, "I think someone's been burying something here." We gathered around, morbid curiosity overcoming our revulsion. The patches on the ground were indeed the result of recent digging. Whatever had been buried was just below the surface. Should we dig?" Our jokester friend asked, his usual joking manner completely gone. We looked at each other, uncertain. Part of me wanted to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But another part, the part that had gotten us this far, needed to know. My best friend pulled a small folding shovel from his backpack. "We'll just take a look," he said. "If it's just a dead animal, we'll leave it be and get out of here." He began to dig at one of the patches. The smell impossibly grew even stronger. We'd barely gone 6 inches down when he stumbled back, gagging. "Oh, God," he choked out. "We need to get out of here now." We didn't need to be told twice. Whatever was buried there, it wasn't a simple case of a dead desert animal. The smell spoke of something far worse, something that had no place in this beautiful, desolate landscape. As we hurried back the way we came, the reality of what we might have stumbled upon began to sink in. This wasn't just a hike gone wrong. We might be dealing with something far more sinister. "We need to call the police," my friend's girlfriend said as we climbed out of the canyon. No one argued. Once we were back at our car and had cell phone reception, we made the call. The dispatcher seemed skeptical at first, but when we described the location and the smell, her tone changed. She assured us a patrol car would be there soon. We waited by our vehicle, all of us quiet, lost in our own thoughts. The beautiful desert landscape that had so captivated us earlier now seemed ominous, potentially hiding dark secrets beneath its sun-baked surface. When the police car arrived, a single officer stepped out. He introduced himself, his weathered face speaking of years of experience. As we recounted our story, I could see a change come over him. His initial professional detachment gave way to a grim focus that sent chills down my spine. "Show me," he said simply. We led the officer back down into the canyon. As we neared the site, I saw his posture change. He became more alert, his hand resting near his holstered weapon. When the smell hit him, he stopped in his tracks. "Wait here," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. We watched as he approached the disturbed ground. He circled the area, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. Then he pulled out his radio and began speaking rapidly into it. I couldn't make out the words, but the urgency in his tone was clear. When he returned to us, his face was grave. "I'm going to need you folks to head back to your car and wait there," he said. "We're going to have a lot more people coming in soon." "What is it?" my best friend asked. "What did you see?" The officer hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Look," he said, his voice low, "I used to work homicide in LA. That smell. For something to generate that kind of odor, you'd need something big, deer-sized at least, and recently buried." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but understood by all of us. This wasn't just a dead animal. This could be a crime scene. As we made our way back to the parking area, we could hear the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. Police vehicles began to arrive, their sirens cutting through the desert quiet. The peaceful hiking spot we had visited just hours ago was transforming into a hive of law enforcement activity. We were questioned separately by detectives, recounting our story over and over. As the day wore on, we watched as more and more officials arrived. There were people in hazmat suits, forensics teams, even what looked like federal agents in dark suits, despite the desert heat. It was well past sunset by the time we were allowed to leave. We were told to expect follow-up calls and were sworn to secrecy about what we had seen. The drive back to Los Angeles was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts about the day's events. Over the next few weeks, we waited anxiously for news. We had been told not to discuss the incident with anyone, but it was hard not to speculate among ourselves. What had we stumbled upon? Was it really what we feared, evidence of a terrible crime? When we finally received a call from the police, the answer we got was far from satisfactory. According to the official report, what we had found was nothing more than some discarded chicken skin and bones. The smell, they claimed, had been exaggerated by the heat and the enclosed space of the canyon. None of us believed it for a second. The memory of that overpowering stench, the grim reaction of the officer, the massive response from law enforcement, none of it lined up with the explanation we were given. But what could we do? We were just a group of hikers who had stumbled upon something we didn't understand. It might have ended there, filed away as a strange and unsettling experience, if not for a chance conversation I had with a co-worker a few months later. I had been careful not to discuss the incident, following the instructions we had been given. But one day, over lunch, my co-worker mentioned he was planning a hiking trip to Fossil Falls. The memory of that day came flooding back, and before I could stop myself, I found myself warning him to be careful. My co-worker, sensing there was more to my concern than general hiking safety, pressed for details. Under his persistent questioning, I finally relented and shared a brief version of our experience. I expected skepticism, maybe even laughter. What I didn't expect was the look of concern that crossed his face. He leaned in close, lowering his voice despite the busy cafeteria around us. "Listen," he said. "I've got a friend who works high up in the Department of Forestry Service. Let me run this by him, see what he says." I hesitated, remembering the stern warnings we'd received about discussing the incident. But curiosity won out, and I nodded my agreement. A week passed before my co-worker approached me again. This time he looked troubled. He pulled me aside into an empty conference room, checking twice to ensure we were alone before he spoke. "I told my friend about what happened," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Man, I've never heard him react like that before. He said, and I quote, 'How did you know about this? You shouldn't know about this, and those guys should forget about it immediately.'" A chill ran down my spine. The official dismissal of our experience had been unsettling, but this reaction was downright alarming. It confirmed what we had suspected all along. There was more to this story than we were being told. "What do you think it means?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. My coworker shook his head. "I don't know for sure, but it's big. Whatever you guys stumbled upon, it's something they're desperate to keep quiet." Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Maybe it was paranoia, but I found myself looking over my shoulder more often, scrutinizing unfamiliar cars on my street. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, but the nagging sense of unease persisted. I reached out to my friends who had been with me that day, curious if they had experienced anything similar. To my surprise, they all reported odd occurrences. One mentioned strange clicks on his phone line. Another swore she'd seen the same nondescript sedan parked outside her apartment several times. Our usually laid-back friend admitted to feeling on edge, like he was constantly being observed. As we pieced together our experiences, a disturbing theory began to take shape. The location of our discovery, the massive law enforcement response, the unconvincing cover story, and now these hints of surveillance. It all pointed to something far more sinister than we had initially imagined. I began to research the area around Fossil Falls more thoroughly. That's when I discovered something that made the pieces start to fall into place. The canyon we had explored that day was not just a remote hiking spot. It was bordered by the China Lake Naval Weapons Center, a vast military installation known for its secretive weapons testing programs. The implications were chilling. If someone had been killed and buried on government land, it would explain the desperate attempt to keep the incident under wraps. The military's involvement would account for the high-level cover-up and the ongoing surveillance we seemed to be experiencing. But who was the victim? And more importantly, who was responsible? These questions haunted me, keeping me awake at night as I turned over the possibilities in my mind. I considered going to the media with our story, but the fear of repercussions held me back. We had no proof beyond our word, and the thought of going up against a government cover-up was terrifying. Plus, there was no guarantee that sharing our story wouldn't put us in even more danger. As the months turned into years, the intensity of our experience faded, but it never truly left us. We moved on with our lives. Careers advanced, relationships changed. We spread out across the country. But that day in Fossil Falls remained a bond between us, a shared secret that we carried. Now, 25 years later, I find myself still pondering the events of that day. The smell, the disturbed earth, the massive response, and the subsequent cover-up. It all feels as vivid as if it happened yesterday. I've never returned to Fossil Falls, and I doubt I ever will. The beauty of the desert has been forever tainted by the memory of what we discovered there. I've come to accept that I may never know the full truth of what happened in that canyon. But I'm certain of one thing. On that spring day 25 years ago, we stumbled upon something that was never meant to be found. A secret buried in the desert, protected by forces far more powerful than we could have imagined. As I write this account, I'm aware of the risks involved in sharing this story. But I believe it's important that the truth, or at least as much of it as we know, comes to light. Perhaps someone out there has a missing piece of this puzzle. Or maybe this will encourage others who have had similar experiences to come forward. To this day, I can't look at a map of the California desert without my eyes being drawn to that small dot marking Fossil Falls. It serves as a reminder that even in the vast emptiness of the desert, secrets can be buried, and that sometimes the most terrifying mysteries are those that remain unsolved. The experience has left me with a profound unease about the power structures that govern our world. It's shaken my faith in official narratives and made me question how much of what we're told is really the truth. How many other secrets are out there, buried in remote locations, protected by official denials and shadowy surveillance? I often wonder about that first officer, the one who seemed to understand the gravity of what we had found. Did he face pressure to change his story? Was he part of the cover-up? Or was he like us, silenced by forces beyond his control? And what of the victim, if indeed there was one? Someone's loved one, perhaps, whose fate remains unknown, whose body lies in an unmarked grave in the unforgiving desert. The thought that we might have been close to bringing them justice, only to have it snatched away, is a burden I carry to this. The incident at Fossil Falls has colored my perception of the world in ways both large and small. I find myself more skeptical of official explanations, more attuned to the possibility of hidden truths beneath the surface of everyday life. It's made me acutely aware of the vast machinery of power that operates just out of sight, shaping our reality in ways we can scarcely imagine. But it's also given me a deep appreciation for the power of bearing witness. Though we were unable to uncover the full truth of what happened that day, the fact that we saw what we saw, that we know what we know, feels significant. It's a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming power, individual experiences and testimonies matter. As I conclude this account, I'm struck by the enduring impact of that single day in the desert. What started as a simple hiking trip became a lifelong journey into the heart of a mystery that touches on some of the darkest aspects of human nature and institutional power. To my friends who were there that day, if you're reading this, know that our shared experience has bonded us in a way that few can understand. To that first officer, wherever you are, I hope you found peace with what you saw that day. And to anyone who might have information about what really happened in that canyon outside Ridgecrest, I urge you to come forward. The truth, no matter how long buried, deserves to see the light of day. As for me, I'll continue to watch and listen, to question and seek understanding. The mystery of Fossil Falls may never be fully solved, but in sharing this story, I hope to keep the search for truth alive. Because in the end, it's not just about what happened in that remote canyon 25 years ago. It's about the larger question of what other secrets might be hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to have the courage to uncover them. The desert, with its vast expanses and hidden canyons, keeps its secrets well. But as our experience shows, even the most carefully buried truths have a way of surfacing, if only we have the courage to look for them. And so, the mystery of Fossil Falls remains, a testament to the power of the unknown and a reminder that sometimes the most profound discoveries are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers. In the years since our discovery, I've often found myself drawn to stories of other unexplained incidents, particularly those involving remote areas or government land. I've connected with online communities of people who have had similar experiences, hikers, campers, and outdoor enthusiasts who have stumbled upon things they couldn't explain, only to be met with official denials or unconvincing explanations. These stories, while varied in their details, often share common threads, unexpected discoveries, swift and disproportionate responses from authorities, and a lingering sense that the truth has been deliberately obscured. It's both comforting and unsettling to know that our experience at Fossil Falls wasn't unique. I've also delved deeper into researching the China Lake Naval Weapons Center and other military installations in the desert. The more I've learned about the scope and secrecy of these facilities, the more plausible our theory about a government cover-up becomes. The vast, restricted areas of the desert provide the perfect backdrop for activities that those in power might want to keep hidden from public view. There have been moments when I've been tempted to return to Fossil Falls, to see if I could uncover any new clues, or perhaps trigger some forgotten memory that might shed light on what really happened that day. But each time, a combination of fear and respect for the unknown has held me back. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, serving as reminders of the limits of our understanding and the vastness of the world around us. As I've grown older, I've come to appreciate the profound impact that day had on shaping my worldview. It taught me to question official narratives, to look beyond the surface of things, and to trust my own experiences, even when they conflict with what I'm told is true. It's made me a more critical thinker, a more observant individual, and paradoxically, a more open-minded person when it comes to considering unconventional explanations for seemingly inexplicable events. I sometimes wonder about the long-term consequences of our discovery. Has our silence over the years allowed something sinister to remain hidden? Or did our stumbling upon that site perhaps prevent future incidents, forcing whoever was responsible to be more cautious? These are questions I'll likely never have answers to, but they continue to weigh on my conscience. To those who might read this account and dismiss it as paranoia or an overactive imagination, I can only say this: I hope you never have an experience that shakes your understanding of reality the way ours did. But if you do, I hope you'll have the courage to speak up, to question, to seek the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or inconvenient it might be. And to those who might recognize elements of their own experiences in our story, know that you're not alone. The world is full of mysteries, some of which may never be fully understood or explained. But in sharing our stories, in refusing to let these incidents be forgotten or dismissed, we play a crucial role in pushing back against the forces that would keep us in the dark. As I write these final words, I'm acutely aware that this account may bring renewed attention to events that powerful people have worked hard to keep buried. If that's the case, so be it. The truth, no matter how long concealed, has a way of coming to light. And if our experience at Fossil Falls teaches us anything, it's that even in the vastness of the desert, even against the machinery of government secrecy, the human spirit's quest for truth cannot be easily extinguished. The mystery of what we found in that canyon may remain unsolved, but in sharing this story, in keeping the memory of that day alive, we ensure that it's not forgotten. And perhaps someday someone will connect the final dots, uncover the last piece of the puzzle, and bring to light the full truth of what happened in Fossil Falls all those years ago. Until then, I'll continue to watch the desert horizon, to listen for echoes of that day in the whisper of the wind through the canyons, and to remain ever vigilant for signs that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, is fighting its way to the surface. Because in the end, it's not just about solving a mystery, it's about standing up for the principle that in a free society, the truth should never remain hidden, no matter how inconvenient or unsettling it might be. The events I'm about to recount still send shivers down my spine, even years later. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, a fresh start, as we welcomed the new year. Instead, it became the most traumatic experience of my life, a harrowing ordeal that would forever change how I viewed the world around me. I had always been an outdoors enthusiast. Growing up in a small town nestled against the foothills of a vast forest, I spent much of my youth exploring trails, camping under star-filled skies, and developing a deep appreciation for nature's beauty. This love for the outdoors was something I shared with my girlfriend, whom I'll call Anna for the sake of this story. Anna and I had met 2 years prior at a local hiking club. She was new to town, having moved from the city for a job at the local newspaper. Her urban background made her initial forays into serious hiking somewhat comical. I still tease her about the time she showed up for a mountain trail wearing designer sneakers and carrying a tiny purse. But she was a quick learner, and her enthusiasm for nature soon matched my own. As our relationship grew, we made it a tradition to seek out unique spots to celebrate special occasions. For New Year's Eve, we had planned something we thought would be spectacular, watching the midnight fireworks from a secluded clearing deep in the woods. We had discovered this spot during a summer hike, a natural opening in the dense forest that provided a perfect view of the night sky. The idea of ringing in the new year, surrounded by nature, just the two of us, seemed incredibly romantic. The day of December 31st dawned crisp and clear. Anna came over to my place early, and we spent the afternoon preparing for our evening adventure. We packed a picnic basket with snacks and a thermos of hot cocoa. I made sure we had warm blankets, as the winter night would be cold. "Don't forget the compass," Anna reminded me as I was zipping up my backpack. She had become almost as cautious as I was about being prepared for any situation in the wilderness. I smiled, holding up the compass along with 2 high-powered flashlights. "Already got it," and extra batteries for the lights. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the town, we loaded everything into my car. The excitement was palpable as we set off, the car's heater working overtime against the winter chill. We chatted animatedly during the drive, discussing our hopes for the coming year and reflecting on the one that was ending. We reached the trailhead around 9:30 p.m. The fireworks were scheduled to start at 10, giving us ample time to hike to our chosen spot. I parked the car on the side of the dirt road that marked the forest's edge. As we stepped out, the silence of the woods enveloped us, broken only by the crunch of gravel under our boots. I took a moment to survey our surroundings. The forest loomed before us, a wall of darkness punctuated by the skeletal silhouettes of leafless trees. The moon, nearly full, cast an eerie glow over the landscape. For a brief moment I felt a twinge of unease, a primal instinct warning of the dangers that might lurk in the shadows. I shook it off, attributing the feeling to the unusual circumstances of being in the woods so late at night. "Ready?" I asked Anna, forcing cheer into my voice. She nodded, pulling her woolen hat down over her ears. "Let's go!" We switched on our flashlights and set off down the trail. The beam of light seemed feeble against the pressing darkness of the forest. Our breath came out in visible puffs in the cold air. The usual sounds of the forest, the rustle of small animals, the hoot of owls, seemed magnified in the quiet of the winter night. As we walked, Anna's hand found mine. Whether it was for warmth or comfort, I couldn't tell, but I appreciated the contact. It grounded me, reminding me that despite the eerie atmosphere, this was just another hike, something we'd done countless times before. About 15 minutes into our trek, we reached the clearing. It was just as beautiful as we remembered, a natural amphitheater surrounded by towering pines. The open sky above twinkled with stars, more visible here away from the town's light pollution. "It's perfect," Anna breathed, her words forming a misty cloud in the cold air. We spread out our blanket in the center of the clearing and settled down to wait for the fireworks. The air was crisp and still, carrying the scent of pine and winter. We huddled close for warmth, sipping hot cocoa from the thermos and talking in low voices, as if afraid to disturb the tranquility of the forest. As 10 o'clock approached, we turned our eyes to the sky in anticipation. Right on cue, the first firework exploded overhead, a burst of red and gold that illuminated the clearing. More followed in quick succession, painting the night sky in a dazzling array of colors. For a while, we were lost in the spectacle, oohing and aahing at particularly impressive displays. The booms echoed through the forest, momentarily drowning out all other sounds. It was during one of these lulls between explosions that Anna suddenly tensed beside me. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her eyes fixed on a point in the woods to our left. I followed her gaze but saw nothing unusual. The edge of the clearing was a wall of shadows, the trees barely visible in the intermittent light of the fireworks. "See what?" I asked, straining my eyes. "I thought I saw something move," she said, her voice uncertain, "like a shadow, but bigger." I scanned the tree line again, but still saw nothing out of the ordinary. "It's probably just a deer," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "The fireworks might have startled it." Anna nodded, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. Still, we turned our attention back to the sky, where the fireworks show was reaching its crescendo. About 5 minutes passed, and I had almost forgotten about Anna's sighting. The finale of the fireworks display was truly spectacular, a rapid-fire series of explosions that lit up the clearing as bright as day. As the last echoes faded and we prepared to toast the new year, Anna suddenly grabbed my arm. "Shh," she hissed, her fingers digging into my skin. "Do you hear that?" I fell silent, listening intently. At first, all I could hear was the ringing in my ears from the fireworks and the usual nighttime sounds of the forest. But then, faintly, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Leaves crunching, twigs snapping under a heavy weight. My heart began to race. Those weren't the sounds of a deer or any other forest animal I was familiar with. Those were human footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the direction Anna had been watching earlier. I scanned the tree line, my eyes straining in the darkness. The moon had disappeared behind a cloud, leaving the edges of the clearing in deep shadow. As I watched, I began to make out a shape moving among the trees. At first, it was just a darker patch of shadow, barely distinguishable from the surrounding gloom. But as it moved closer to the clearing, its form became clearer. It was a man. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with a purposeful stride that sent chills down my spine. This was no lost hiker or fellow fireworks watcher. There was something predatory in his movements, something that screamed danger. I'm not a small guy myself. At 6'5", I've rarely felt physically intimidated by anyone. But as I watched this stranger emerge from the woods, I felt a primal fear take hold. It wasn't just his size, though he was impressively built. It was the way he carried himself, the deliberate nature of his approach. He knew we were here, and he was coming for us. As if to confirm my worst fears, another firework exploded overhead, briefly illuminating the clearing. In that flash of light, I saw something that turned my blood to ice, the glint of metal in the man's hand. He was carrying a large knife. Time seemed to slow down. In that moment, I knew we were in serious danger. This wasn't a chance encounter or a misunderstanding. This was a predator who had found his prey. "Run," I said to Anna, my voice low and urgent. "Now!" We scrambled to our feet, abandoning our blanket and supplies. Anna was ahead of me as we plunged into the woods, running back the way we had come. I could hear heavy footsteps behind us, branches snapping as our pursuer gave chase. The woods, which had seemed so peaceful earlier, now felt like a nightmare landscape. Every root threatened to trip us. Every low-hanging branch seemed to reach out to snag us. The sound of our ragged breathing and pounding footsteps mixed with the distant boom of lingering fireworks, creating a surreal soundtrack to our flight. I've always considered myself to be in good shape, but fear lent us speed I didn't know we possessed. We tore through the forest, barely aware of the branches that whipped at our faces and the uneven ground beneath our feet. All that mattered was putting distance between us and the man with the knife. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, the sounds of pursuit began to fade. We had managed to put some distance between us and our attacker. Still, we didn't slow down. Fear drove us forward, the promise of safety in the form of my car urging us on. Finally, we burst out of the tree line onto the road where we had parked. For a moment, relief flooded through me. We had made it. We were safe. But as we approached my car, that relief turned to icy horror. Even in the dim light, I could see that something was wrong. As we got closer, my worst fears were confirmed. All 4 tires had been slashed, the rubber hanging in tatters. Anna let out a choked sob beside me, the reality of our situation sinking in. We were stranded miles from help, with a knife-wielding maniac somewhere in the woods behind us. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. But when I tried to call 911, my heart sank even further. No service, of course. We were too far out, too isolated. Anna was on the verge of hysterics now, her eyes wide with fear as she kept glancing back at the woods. I tried to think, to come up with some plan, but my mind was blank, consumed by panic. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, a sound cut through the night, the rumble of an approaching vehicle. For a moment, hope warred with fear. Was this help, or was it our attacker returning to finish what he had started? As the vehicle, a large pickup truck, came into view, Anna made a split-second decision. She ran out into the road, waving her arms frantically. I held my breath, ready to pull her back if the truck didn't slow down. But it did slow, coming to a stop just behind my disabled car. The driver's door opened, and a large man stepped out. In the glow of the truck's headlights, I could see he was even taller than me, his build solid and imposing. "What's going on here?" he called out, his voice gruff but not unkind. Anna, her words tumbling out in a rush, explained our situation. The man listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. Without a word, he turned back to his truck. I tensed, unsure of what to expect. But when he turned back to us, I felt a surge of relief. In one hand, he held a shotgun. In the other, a satellite phone. "Call the police," he said, handing the phone to Anna. "I'll keep watch." As Anna made the call, the man, who introduced himself as a local hunter, scanned the woods, his shotgun at the ready. The police promised to be there within minutes, but each second felt like an eternity. Anna, having finished the call, began to pace nervously. Suddenly, she let out a piercing scream, her finger pointing towards the woods. I spun around, my heart in my throat. There, at the edge of the tree line, stood our pursuer. In the harsh glare of the truck's headlights, I could make out more details. He was indeed tall, probably around 6'3", with a muscular build. The knife in his hand glinted menacingly. The hunter reacted instantly. He raised his shotgun and fired a warning shot into the air. The sound was deafening, echoing through the quiet night. Our attacker, startled by the noise, turned and fled back into the woods. The next few minutes were tense, all of us scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. But our attacker didn't reappear. When the police finally arrived, lights flashing and sirens blaring, I felt a wave of relief so strong it nearly brought me to my knees. The rest of the night passed in a blur of police statements and questions. A team was sent to search the woods, while a tow truck was called to deal with my car. Anna and I were taken to the police station, where we gave our best description of the man who had chased us. But in the darkness and chaos, we had seen little of his face. The police promised to keep investigating, but I could tell from their expressions that they held little hope of finding our attacker. As dawn broke on the first day of the new year, Anna and I were finally allowed to go home. We were exhausted, both physically and emotionally drained. The celebration we had planned seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the terrifying reality of what we had experienced. In the days and weeks that followed, the events of that night continued to haunt us. Anna had nightmares, often waking in a cold sweat, convinced she could hear footsteps outside our bedroom. I found myself jumping at shadows, constantly looking over my shoulder whenever we were out. We never returned to that spot in the woods. The mere thought of it filled us with dread. Our love for nature and hiking, once a cornerstone of our relationship, had been tainted by fear. As time passed, the raw terror of that night began to fade, replaced by a sort of numb disbelief. Had it really happened? Sometimes it felt like a particularly vivid nightmare, something our minds had conjured up. But then I would catch a glimpse of the scar on Anna's arm, a reminder of a branch that had caught her as we fled, and the reality would come crashing back. The police never found our attacker. They theorized that he might have been a drifter, someone passing through the area. But the level of preparation, the slashed tires, the ambush in the woods, suggested something more sinister, more planned. I often find myself wondering about the man who chased us that night. Who was he? What were his intentions? The not knowing is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of all. Is he still out there, waiting for his next victims? This experience changed us in profound ways. We became more cautious, more aware of our surroundings. Our trust in the inherent goodness of people was shaken, but it also brought us closer together. Our shared trauma, creating a bond that couldn't be broken. Now, years later, as another new year approaches, I can't help but reflect on that night. The fear is still there, a dull ache in the pit of my stomach. But there's also gratitude for our survival, for the kindness of the hunter who came to our aid, for each day we've had since. If there's a lesson to be taken from our experience, it's this: the world can be a dangerous place, full of unseen threats and unexpected terrors. But it's also full of good people, of helpers who appear when you need them most. And sometimes, survival comes down to a combination of preparation, quick thinking, and sheer luck. As I write this, I'm struck by how close we came to becoming just another statistic, another unsolved mystery in the annals of true crime. The thought sends a shiver down my spine, but we survived. We're here to tell our story, to warn others of the dangers that can lurk in even the most seemingly peaceful places. To anyone reading this who might be planning their own adventure off the beaten path, I urge you to be careful. Be prepared, trust your instincts, and remember that sometimes the most dangerous predators are not the four-legged kind, but those who walk on two legs. Our New Year's Eve in the woods may have been the worst night of our lives, but it also taught us valuable lessons about survival, about the strength we possess when pushed to our limits, and about the thin line that separates safety from danger. As another year draws to a close, I find myself grateful, not for the experience itself, but for the perspective it has given me. Each day is a gift, each moment of safety and peace, something to be cherished. And while the memory of that night will always be with us, we refuse to let it define us or control our lives. We still enjoy the outdoors, though now we're much more cautious about where and when we go. We've taken self-defense classes, learned survival skills, and always make sure someone knows where we are. The woods may have lost some of their magic for us, but we're determined not to let fear rob us of the joy we once found there. In the months following our ordeal, Anna and I sought counseling to help us process the trauma. It was during these sessions that we began to unpack not just the events of that night, but how they had changed our perspective on life and safety. Our therapist, Dr. Ramirez, helped us develop coping strategies for the anxiety and hypervigilance that had become a constant in our lives. She introduced us to mindfulness techniques and encouraged us to gradually expose ourselves to nature again, starting with short walks in well-populated parks. It was during one of these therapeutic walks that we had a breakthrough. We were strolling through a busy city park, surrounded by families and joggers, when Anna suddenly stopped. "You know," she said, her eyes scanning the tree line at the park's edge, "I don't think I've really looked at the trees since that night." I mean, really looked at them. I realized she was right. Since our encounter, we had both developed a habit of viewing wooded areas as potential threats rather than sources of beauty. It was a sobering realization, a testament to how deeply our experience had affected us. From that day on, we made a conscious effort to reclaim our love for nature. It wasn't easy. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig would send our hearts racing. But slowly, incrementally, we began to find joy in the outdoors again. We started small with day hikes on popular trails. We always went in groups now, finding safety in numbers. We joined a local hiking club, sharing our story as a cautionary tale, but also as a way to connect with others who understood the healing power of nature. As we worked through our trauma, we also became advocates for outdoor safety. I started a blog, sharing tips on hiking preparedness and personal security in remote areas. Anna, putting her journalism skills to use, wrote a series of articles for the local paper about the importance of community watch programs in rural areas. Our story caught the attention of a documentary filmmaker who was working on a series about survival stories. At first, we were hesitant to participate. The idea of reliving that night for a camera was daunting. But ultimately, we decided that sharing our experience might help others and contribute to our own healing process. The filming process was challenging but cathartic. Revisiting the site of our ordeal for the documentary was particularly difficult. Standing in that clearing, now bathed in daylight, brought back a flood of memories. But it also allowed us to confront our fears head-on and reclaim that space in a way. During the filming, we met other survivors of similar incidents. Their stories were both heartbreaking and inspiring. We formed a support network, sharing our experiences and coping strategies. It was comforting to know we weren't alone in our struggles. One unexpected outcome of our ordeal was a renewed appreciation for the kindness of strangers. The hunter who came to our aid that night had disappeared into the chaos once the police arrived. We never got his name or had a chance to properly thank him. But his act of bravery had restored our faith in humanity at a moment when we needed it most. Inspired by his example, we both became more involved in our community. I volunteered with the local search and rescue team, using my outdoor skills to help others in need. Anna started a neighborhood watch program, working to make our community safer for everyone. As the years passed, the acute fear from that night gradually faded, replaced by a more nuanced understanding of risk and safety. We learned to balance caution with a desire to live fully, to not let one terrible experience define our lives. 5 years after the incident, we decided to face our fears in a big way. We planned a camping trip, not to our old spot, but to a new location we had researched thoroughly. We went with a group of friends, all of whom knew our story and understood the significance of this trip. The night before we left, I found Anna sitting on our porch staring at the stars. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, sitting down beside her. She turned to me, a mix of determination and apprehension in her eyes. "No," she admitted, "but I think we need to do it anyway." That camping trip was a turning point for us. Yes, there were moments of fear, times when a sound in the night would send us into a panic. But there were also moments of pure joy, laughing around the campfire with friends, waking up to a stunning sunrise, feeling connected to nature in a way we hadn't in years. As we packed up to leave at the end of the trip, Anna turned to me with tears in her eyes. "We did it," she said simply. I knew she meant more than just completing the camping trip. We had reclaimed a part of ourselves that we thought we had lost forever. Our experience has left its mark on us. There's no denying that. We still have moments of fear, times when the memory of that night comes rushing back. But we've learned to live with it, to use it as a source of strength rather than a limitation. We've become more aware of the delicate balance between embracing life's adventures and staying safe. We still love the outdoors, but we approach it with a heightened sense of respect and preparation. Every hike, every camping trip is meticulously planned. We always let someone know where we're going and when we expect to return. Our ordeal has also made us more empathetic to others who have experienced trauma. We've become active in support groups for survivors of violent crimes, sharing our story and offering hope to those who are still struggling to reclaim their lives. Looking back on that New Year's Eve now, I'm struck by how quickly life can change. In the span of a few hours, our world was turned upside down. But I'm also amazed at the resilience of the human spirit, at our capacity to heal and grow, even in the face of terrifying experiences. That night in the woods taught us valuable lessons about survival, about the importance of preparedness, and about the strength we all possess when pushed to our limits. But perhaps the most important lesson was about the power of choice. The choice to not let fear dictate our lives. The choice to find beauty and joy even after experiencing terror. As another new year approaches, Anna and I find ourselves reflecting on how far we've come. We still don't go out to watch fireworks in remote locations, preferring to celebrate from the safety of our home or in public gatherings. But we no longer view the turn of the year with dread or painful memories. Instead, it's become a time of gratitude for our survival, for the life we've built together, and for every day we've had since that harrowing night. To those who might find themselves facing their own moments of terror, I want to say this: survival is possible. Healing is possible. It's not an easy journey, and it's not a straight line. There will be setbacks and difficult days. But with time, with support, and with the determination to not let fear win, it is possible to reclaim your life. Our New Year's Eve nightmare changed us forever. But it didn't break us. If anything, it made us stronger, more aware, more appreciative of the precious gift of life. And while I would never wish such an experience on anyone, I've come to realize that sometimes our deepest strengths are revealed in our darkest moments. As I finish writing this account, I'm reminded of a quote by Ernest Hemingway: "The world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places." Anna and I were broken that night, but we've grown stronger in those broken places. And in sharing our story, we hope to lend some of that strength to others who might need it. So this New Year's Eve, as the clock strikes midnight and fireworks light up the sky, we'll be holding each other close, grateful for another year of life, love, and healing. And we'll be sending out a silent wish for all those who might be facing their own dark nights. May you find the strength to survive, to heal, and to reclaim the joy that is your birthright. In the end, our story is not just about a night of terror in the woods. It's about the journey that followed, a journey of healing, of rediscovery, and of learning to live fully despite the scars we carry. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a reminder that even in our darkest moments, hope can be found. As we step into another year, we do so with a deep appreciation for the preciousness of life and the strength we all possess within us. Our experience has taught us that while we cannot control everything that happens to us, we can control how we respond. And in that response lies our power, our healing, and ultimately our triumph over fear. Growing up in rural Texas in the late 1960s, I was no stranger to the great outdoors. Our home was nestled in a sprawling expanse of wilderness, about a 2 to 3 hour drive north of Houston. It was a place where nature reigned supreme, where the line between civilization and the wild was often blurred. My father was an avid hunter, a passion he passed down to me from an early age. By the time I was 12, I was already familiar with the weight of a rifle in my hands and the quiet thrill of tracking game through the dense undergrowth. Hunting wasn't just a hobby for us. It was a way of life, a connection to the land and our ancestors who had carved out a living from this unforgiving terrain. The incident I'm about to recount happened during one of those crisp autumn mornings when the air is sharp with the promise of the coming winter. I'd woken up before dawn, excitement coursing through my veins at the prospect of a day's hunting. My brother, just a year younger than me, was supposed to join, but when I went to wake him, he was dead to the world, snoring softly in his bed. "Come on, wake up," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. But he didn't budge, lost in the depths of sleep that only a preteen boy can achieve. After a few more futile attempts, I made a decision that would change my life forever. Screw it, I thought, I'll go alone. Looking back now, I can see the foolishness of that choice. But at 12 years old, I felt invincible, confident in my abilities and eager to prove myself. So with a mixture of excitement and defiance, I gathered my gear, a flashlight, my trusty rifle, and a bag of trail mix, and set out into the pre-dawn darkness. The woods were different in the dark, alive with sounds and shadows that the daylight kept at bay. My flashlight carved a narrow path through the gloom, barely penetrating the thick canopy overhead. I moved carefully, my footsteps muffled by years of fallen leaves, my senses alert for any sign of movement. As I walked, the sky began to lighten, the black of night giving way to the gray of early morning. By the time the sun peeked over the horizon, painting the woods in soft golden light, I no longer needed my flashlight. I switched it off, relishing the quiet of the forest around me. I'd been walking for about half an hour when it happened. The change was sudden, like stepping from a warm room into a freezer. A chill ran down my spine, raising goosebumps on my arms, despite the mild temperature. It wasn't a physical cold, but something deeper, more primal. It was the feeling of being watched. I gripped my rifle tighter, its familiar weight offering little comfort against this unseen threat. My eyes scanned the surrounding woods, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of what might be causing this sudden unease. But the forest remained still, indifferent to my growing fear. Trying to shake off the feeling, I kept walking. But each step felt heavier than the last, as if the very air was thickening around me. Then I heard it, a sharp crack that cut through the morning silence like a gunshot, a twig snapping underfoot. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would burst from my chest. Time seemed to stretch as I stood there, barely breathing, straining my ears for any further sound. And then it began. Laughter. At first it was distant, barely audible over the rustle of leaves in the gentle morning breeze. But there was something about it that chilled me to my very core. It wasn't the carefree laughter of a fellow hiker or the mischievous giggle of my brother playing a prank. This laughter held a note of malice, of otherworldly glee that had no place in these familiar woods. My first thought, born of desperate hope rather than reason, was that it must be my brother. Perhaps he had woken up after all and followed me, intending to scare me as payback for leaving him behind. "Hey!" I called out, my voice sounding thin and scared even to my own ears. "Stop messing around before I shoot." But there was no response. No sheepish grin from behind a tree, no admission of a joke taken too far. Only that terrible laughter, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Fear gripped me then, a fear unlike anything I had ever known. These woods, which had always been a second home to me, suddenly felt alien and hostile. Every shadow held a potential threat, every rustling leaf a harbinger of doom. I turned and began walking back the way I had come, trying to move quickly without breaking into a run. But with each step, the laughter grew louder, closer. It was as if whatever was producing that sound was toying with me, letting me think I could escape, only to dash that hope with its ever-nearing presence. My walk became a jog, the jog a run. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, heedless of the noise I was making. All thoughts of hunting were forgotten. I was prey now, fleeing from a predator I couldn't see, but whose presence I felt with every fiber of my being. As I ran, the laughter seemed to multiply, coming at me from all directions. It was no longer just behind me, but to my sides, ahead of me, even seeming to come from above. The sound filled the woods, drowning out the pounding of my heart and the ragged gasps of my breathing. In desperation, I stopped and spun around, my rifle raised. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear and exertion. "Show yourself!" For a moment, the woods fell silent. The sudden absence of the laughter was almost as terrifying as the sound itself had been. Then, just as I began to hope that perhaps it had all been in my imagination, a voice spoke. "I'm gonna get you." The words were simple, almost childish in their threat. But the voice that uttered them was anything but. Deep and guttural, it seemed to come from the earth itself, reverberating through the ground beneath my feet and the very air around me. Terror, pure and primal, seized me. I ran as I had never run before, heedless of direction or destination. My only thought was to get away, to escape that voice and the nameless horror it promised. As I fled, the laughter started again. No longer content to merely follow, it now surrounded me, pressing in from all sides. It was in the rustle of leaves overhead, the crunch of twigs underfoot, the very air I gasped into my burning lungs. The pressure built, a physical force that threatened to crush me. The world seemed to darken, as if the laughter was somehow blotting out the sun itself. I felt myself beginning to lose control, my mind unable to cope with the terror that engulfed me. In that moment of utter despair, some deeply buried instinct took over. My hands, operating independently of my panic-stricken mind, raised my rifle. Without conscious thought, I pulled the trigger. The gunshot rang out, impossibly loud in the confined space of the forest. And just like that, the laughter stopped. The pressure lifted, the darkness receded. I was alone in the woods once more, the echo of the gunshot fading into the distance. For a long moment I stood there, my rifle still raised, ears ringing from the shot. Then, as the reality of what had happened began to sink in, I moved with frantic haste. I gathered my scattered belongings, the flashlight I had dropped in my panic, the bag of trail mix that had spilled across the forest floor, and I ran. I ran without stopping, without looking back, until I burst from the tree line and saw my house in the distance. Only when my feet hit the worn wood of our front porch did I finally allow myself to slow down, to breathe. My father, alerted by the sound of my approach, met me at the door. One look at my face told him something was wrong. As I stood there, gasping for breath, he guided me inside and sat me down at the kitchen table. When I had calmed enough to speak, I told him everything. I expected disbelief, perhaps even anger at my disobedience in going out alone. But my father listened in silence, his face growing grave as I recounted my terrifying experience. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and serious. "Son," he said, "the woods hold more secrets than we know. You must never go into them alone." Those words stuck with me, shaping my relationship with the forest for the rest of my life. I continued to hunt, to explore the woods that had been such an integral part of my childhood. But I never again ventured into them alone. Even now, decades later, I can still hear that laughter when I close my eyes. It echoes in my dreams, a reminder of the day I learned that there are things in this world beyond our understanding, forces that defy explanation. Some might dismiss my experience as the overactive imagination of a young boy, or perhaps a prank gone too far. But I know what I heard that day. I know the fear I felt, the evil I sensed lurking in those familiar woods. And so I pass this story on, a warning to those who might be tempted to underestimate the wild places of the world. Respect the woods, for they are ancient and powerful. And never, never venture into them alone. As I've grown older, I've often reflected on that day, trying to make sense of what happened. I've researched local legends, spoken with other hunters and outdoorsmen, even consulted with experts in various fields. While I've never found a definitive explanation for what I experienced, I've come to realize that perhaps the not knowing is part of the point. The woods, and indeed the world at large, are full of mysteries. As humans, we like to think we've tamed the wild, that we understand all there is to know about our environment. But my experience taught me the folly of such thinking. There are things out there that defy our understanding, forces that operate beyond the realm of what we consider normal or possible. This realization has shaped my life in many ways. It's made me more cautious, certainly, but also more open-minded. I've learned to listen when others share their own inexplicable experiences, to withhold judgment and instead offer understanding, because I know firsthand how it feels to encounter something that shakes your understanding of reality to its core. Over the years, I've returned to those woods many times. Each visit brings a mix of emotions: nostalgia for the carefree days of my youth, respect for the raw power of nature, and yes, a lingering fear of what might be lurking just beyond the next tree. But I've never again heard that laughter, never felt that overwhelming sense of malevolent presence. Sometimes I wonder if whatever was out there that day has moved on, or if it's still there, waiting. Other times I question whether it was ever really there at all, or if it was some manifestation of my own fears and insecurities. But then I remember the visceral terror I felt, the way the very air seemed to vibrate with that unearthly laughter. And I know that what I experienced was real, regardless of whether I can explain it or not. I've passed this story down to my own children, just as my father passed down his wisdom to me. I've taught them to respect the woods, to understand that nature is not just a playground or a resource to be exploited, but a force to be reckoned with. I've instilled in them the importance of preparation, of never taking unnecessary risks, and of always having a buddy when venturing into the wild. But more than that, I've tried to teach them about the balance between healthy skepticism and open-mindedness. I want them to question, to seek explanations, but also to be willing to accept that sometimes there are no easy answers. That sometimes the most honest response to the inexplicable is simply to acknowledge it and learn from it. As I near the end of my life, I find myself drawn more and more to those woods, not out of some morbid fascination or desire to confront whatever it was I encountered that day. Rather, I feel a need to make peace with it, to acknowledge that this experience, as terrifying as it was, has been a defining part of my life. I still hunt, though these days it's more about the connection with nature than actually bagging game. And I still never go alone. But now, when I walk those familiar trails, I feel a sense of completion, of coming full circle. The fear is still there, a quiet undercurrent beneath the surface, but it no longer controls me. Instead, I feel a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons I learned that day, for the wisdom my father shared, and for the life I've been able to live because of those things. I'm grateful for the reminder that the world is vast and mysterious, that there is always more to learn and discover. And so, as I sit here recounting this story one more time, I do so not to frighten or to warn, but to share a piece of my truth, to pass on the lesson that has been the guiding principle of my life. Respect the unknown, prepare for the unexpected, and never underestimate the power of the wild places of the world. For in those places, in the depths of the woods or the heights of the mountains or the vastness of the oceans, we are reminded of our place in the grand scheme of things. We are reminded that we are not masters of this world, but merely a part of it. And in that reminder lies both terror and wonder, fear and awe. It's a lesson I learned on that autumn morning so many years ago, with the sound of unearthly laughter echoing through the trees. A lesson that has stayed with me through all the years since, shaping the man I became and the life I've lived. And it's a lesson I hope will continue to be passed down from generation to generation, not as a ghost story or a cautionary tale, but as a reminder of the vast, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying world we inhabit. A reminder to always keep our minds open, our senses alert, and our respect for the unknown intact. Because out there, in the wild places of the world, there are still secrets waiting to be discovered. And who knows, maybe someday someone will find an explanation for what I experienced that day. Until then, I'll continue to tell my story, to share my experience, and to remind others that sometimes the most profound truths are found in the things we can't explain. As I finish recounting this tale, I'm struck by how vivid the memories still are, how fresh the emotions. Time may have dimmed the sharp edges of fear, but it hasn't erased the impact of that day. If anything, the passing years have only deepened my appreciation for the experience and the lessons it taught me. I often wonder about others who might have had similar encounters in those woods, or in other wild places around the world. Are there others out there who have heard that chilling laughter, felt that oppressive presence? I've never shared my story widely, fearing disbelief or ridicule. But perhaps, by opening up about my experience, I might encourage others to share theirs. There's a comfort in knowing you're not alone, in finding others who have glimpsed behind the veil of everyday reality and seen something they can't explain. It doesn't make the experience any less terrifying, but it does make it easier to bear. As I look out my window at the edge of those woods, still as dark and mysterious as they were all those years ago, I'm filled with a mix of emotions. There's still that lingering fear, a respect for the unknown that will never leave me. But there's also a sense of connection, a feeling that I'm part of something larger than myself. Those woods and the experience I had in them have been a constant presence in my life. They've been a source of fear, yes, but also of strength. They've taught me about resilience, about facing the unknown with courage. They've shown me that there's more to this world than what we can see or touch or easily explain. And in the end, isn't that what life is all about? Facing our fears, embracing the unknown, and growing from our experiences, no matter how terrifying they might be. So as I sit here, an old man now with a lifetime of experiences behind me, I find myself grateful for that day in the woods, grateful for the fear, for the mystery, for the lesson in humility it provided. Because without that day, without that inexplicable encounter, I might never have truly understood the vastness and wonder of the world around us. To anyone reading this, I say, respect the wild places. Prepare for the unexpected. Keep an open mind, but also a healthy dose of caution. And above all, remember that there are still mysteries in this world, still experiences that defy explanation. Who knows? Maybe someday you'll have your own encounter with the unexplained. And if you do, remember my story. Remember that you're not alone. And remember that sometimes the most profound truths come not from what we can explain, but from what we can't. As for me, I'll continue to visit those woods, to walk those familiar trails. And each time I do, I'll remember that day, that laughter, and the lessons it taught me. I'll carry the memory with me, a reminder of the thin line between the known and the unknown, the explained and the inexplicable. In recent years, I've taken to bringing my grandchildren into these woods, not to the exact spot where I had my encounter. I've never been able to pinpoint that location again, as if the forest itself had rearranged to hide its secrets. But I bring them to the edges, to the safer trails, and I teach them about respect for nature and the importance of preparedness. I see in their eyes the same wonder I once had, the same eagerness to explore and discover. But I also make sure they understand the potential dangers, both natural and otherwise. I tell them my story not to frighten them, but to instill in them a healthy respect for the unknown. Some of them believe me outright, their young minds still open to the possibility of the unexplained. Others are more skeptical, products of a more rational, scientific age. But even the doubters listen intently, perhaps sensing the truth in my voice, the genuine fear that still lingers after all these years. I've often wondered if I'll ever encounter that presence again. Part of me hopes I won't, that whatever it was has long since moved on or faded away. But another part, a part I'm not always comfortable acknowledging, almost wishes for one more encounter, one more chance to face that fear, to perhaps understand what it was that I experienced that day. But I know better than to go looking for it. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some experiences are meant to remain unexplained, serving as reminders of the vast unknown that surrounds us. As I write these words, I can hear the wind rustling through the trees outside my window. It's a sound that used to fill me with dread, especially on dark nights when the memory of that laughter seemed to echo in every gust. Now, though, it's almost comforting, a reminder of the wild, untamed nature that exists just beyond our doorstep. I've come to see my experience as a gift, in a way, a glimpse behind the curtain of reality, a peek into the vast unknown that surrounds us. It's shaped my life, my beliefs, my very understanding of the world. And while I wouldn't wish the terror of that day on anyone, I'm grateful for the perspective it's given me. To those who might read this and scoff, dismissing it as the ramblings of an old man or the product of an overactive imagination, I say this: I hope you never have to face what I faced that day. I hope you never have to confront something that shakes the very foundations of your reality. But if you do, remember my story. Remember that you're not alone in facing the unexplained. And to those who might have had their own brushes with the unknown, who have faced their own inexplicable terrors, I say, you're not crazy. Your experiences are valid even if they defy explanation. Don't let anyone dismiss your truth. As I near the end of my life, I find a certain peace in knowing that there are still mysteries in this world. That despite all our advancements, all our technology and science, there are still things that defy our understanding. It gives me hope that the world will always have the capacity to surprise us, to fill us with wonder and, yes, sometimes with fear. I don't know what awaits us beyond this life. Perhaps all will be revealed, and I'll finally understand what happened to me that day in the woods. Or perhaps the mystery will remain, extending even beyond the veil of death. Either way, I face the future with the same mix of trepidation and curiosity that has defined my life since that fateful day. To the woods that have been both my terror and my teacher, I offer my respect and my gratitude. To whatever force or entity I encountered that day, I offer my acknowledgement. You changed me, shaped me, taught me lessons I've carried throughout my life. And to those who come after me, who might walk those same trails or face their own unexplained phenomena, I offer this advice. Be prepared, be respectful, and above all, be open to the possibility that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy. The woods are calling, as they always have, and even now, in my twilight years, I feel the pull to answer. So I'll lace up my boots, check my supplies, and step once more into the embrace of the forest. For in those wild places, in the depths of the unknown, I've found not just fear, but also profound truth and an enduring sense of wonder. The laughter may be gone, but its echo remains. And in that echo, I found a lifetime of meaning, a wellspring of respect for the mysteries that surround us, and a deep appreciation for the delicate balance between the known and the unknown. As I close this account, I'm reminded of the words my father spoke to me all those years ago. The woods hold more secrets than we know. How right he was, and how grateful I am to have been given a glimpse of those secrets, terrifying though it may have been. So I'll end with this. Respect the woods, for they are ancient and powerful. Embrace the unknown, for in it lies the potential for growth and understanding. And never, ever venture into the wild places alone, for you never know what might be waiting just beyond the next tree, ready to challenge everything you think you know about the world. The laughter may have faded, but the lesson remains. And it's a lesson I'll carry with me into whatever adventure awaits beyond this life. The world had changed almost overnight. What began as distant news reports quickly escalated into a global pandemic, forcing us all into an unprecedented period of isolation and uncertainty. As the days of quarantine stretched into weeks and then months, people found various ways to cope with the new reality. For my roommate and I, our salvation came in an unexpected form, the woods behind our house. We were lucky, I suppose. While others were confined to cramped apartments in bustling cities, we had acres of forested land at our doorstep. It became our refuge, our escape from the constant barrage of grim news and the claustrophobia of lockdown. Every day, rain or shine, we'd venture into those woods, seeking solace in nature's embrace. At first, our excursions were fairly typical. We'd hike the well-worn trails, collect interesting rocks, and occasionally swim in the clear, cool streams that crisscrossed the forest. We'd bring beers, sipping them as we sat on fallen logs, discussing everything from the mundane details of our day to our deepest fears about the uncertain future we were facing. But as the days wore on, and the novelty of our woodland adventures began to wear thin, we found ourselves seeking new ways to experience the forest. That's when we stumbled upon what would become our daily ritual, something that sounds odd to say out loud, but at the time, it kept us sane. It started innocently enough. One particularly hot day, frustrated with the sweat-soaked clothes clinging to our bodies, we decided to strip down to our underwear. The feeling of the cool forest air on our skin was liberating, a small act of rebellion against the constraints of our new reality. From there, it was a small step to full nudity, save for our socks and shoes. We'd enter the woods fully clothed, then find a secluded spot to disrobe, stuffing our clothes into our backpacks. Then bare as the day we were born, except for our footwear, we'd hike in silence to a small lagoon we'd discovered deep in the heart of the forest. There, we'd lay out on the smooth rocks surrounding the water, letting the sun warm our pale skin. It was an incredibly meditative experience. Without the rustle of clothing or the constant chatter we usually engaged in, we could hear the forest in a way we never had before. The whisper of wind through leaves, the gentle lapping of water against the shore, the distant calls of birds. It all became crystal clear, as if we were hearing it for the first time. As the days passed, we began to feel more and more in tune with the woods around us. Without the barrier of clothing and the careless stomping of booted feet, we moved through the forest with a new grace and awareness. It felt primal, instinctive, as if we were tapping into some long-dormant part of ourselves. I was often stoned during these excursions, which probably contributed to the heightened sensory experience. The cannabis seemed to amplify every sound, every sensation. The feel of moss under my bare feet, the scent of pine in the air, the play of dappled sunlight through the canopy above, it all took on a new, almost mystical quality. Our increased awareness had some unexpected side effects. We'd often surprise other hikers, passing within a few feet of them before they noticed us. It was as if we'd become part of the forest itself, moving as silently and naturally as the deer and foxes that called these woods home. More remarkably, the wildlife seemed to accept our presence in a way they hadn't before. Deer would continue grazing as we passed, barely sparing us a glance. Birds would land on nearby branches, serenading us with their songs. Even the normally skittish squirrels would go about their business, seemingly unperturbed by our naked forms moving through their domain. As our connection to the forest deepened, we began to notice subtle changes that would have escaped us before. We could sense the approach of storms hours before the first clouds appeared on the horizon. The shift in air pressure, the change in the behavior of the animals, it all spoke to us in a language we were only just beginning to understand. We also became acutely aware of the forest's moods. Most days, it was welcoming, vibrant with life and energy. But sometimes, usually before a storm or when something had disturbed the local wildlife, the woods would fall silent. In those moments, the hair on the back of my neck would stand up, a primal instinct warning of potential danger. It was on one of these days that our woodland idyll took a dark turn. The sky had been overcast for days, the air thick with humidity and the promise of rain. Despite the gloomy weather, we'd ventured out as usual, desperate for our daily dose of nature. The woods were quieter than normal, the usual cacophony of birdsong and insect buzz muted. We'd only encountered a couple of other hikers all day, the threatening weather keeping most people away. As evening approached, darkness began to creep in earlier than usual, the heavy cloud cover hastening nightfall. We were on our way back, barefoot and nearly naked, knocking back the dregs of some warm beer we'd brought along. The alcohol had dulled our senses somewhat, and we were chatting and laughing, our voices seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet forest. We were coming up a small hill when it hit me. It was like I'd swallowed a snowball, a sudden cold dread settling in the pit of my stomach. I looked up at my roommate, the words dying on my lips as I saw the expression on her face. She had frozen mid-laugh, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored my own. Something was wrong. The woods felt off. The murky shadows seemed to press in around us, and the silence that enveloped us was different from the peaceful quiet we'd grown accustomed to. This silence was heavy, oppressive, laden with tension. Then we heard it. At first, it was just a faint sound on the edge of hearing, a metallic clanging that seemed out of place in the organic soundscape of the forest. As we listened, straining our ears, the sound became clearer. It was the rhythmic sound of metal striking stone, coming from further down the trail, directly between us and the way out of the woods. We stood like statues, tucked behind some trees, just listening. As the sound continued, a realization dawned on me. It was a shovel. Someone was digging. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what we were hearing. Who would be digging in the woods at this hour with a storm brewing? And why did the sound fill me with such inexplicable dread? Despite every instinct screaming at me to turn and run, curiosity got the better of us. We crept closer, moving as silently as we could over the leaf-strewn forest floor. As we drew nearer, the sound of digging grew louder. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my palms itchy with sweat despite the cool air. I glanced at my roommate and saw that her face was flushed, a deep rose red that spoke of fear and exertion. I tried to rationalize what we were hearing, to calm the rising panic in my chest. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Just someone digging in the middle of the woods, at dusk, during a pandemic, with a storm approaching. Each explanation I conjured seemed more far-fetched than the last. Maybe they were burying a beloved pet. But why choose the middle of a trail? Maybe they were building a bike jump, but we hadn't seen any bikes. Maybe they were doing trail maintenance. But why now, with darkness falling and rain threatening? On and on my mind churned, desperately seeking a benign explanation for what we were encountering. But with each step we took, with each clang of metal against stone, the knot in my gut tightened. We were almost upon the source of the sound now. Through the trees, we could make out a figure on the trail ahead. It appeared to be a man, though it was hard to be sure. They were dressed oddly for the summer weather, wearing a scarf, hat, and heavy black clothing that obscured their form. The closer we got, the more surreal the situation became. Here we were, two young women, nearly naked save for our shoes and socks, creeping through the woods towards a stranger wielding a shovel. The absurdity of it might have been comical, if not for the palpable sense of danger that hung in the air. I became acutely aware of our vulnerability. We were barefoot, dressed only in our swimsuits and light overalls. I had a backpack with some random items, a small garden spade, some found trash, a few rocks we'd collected. My roommate was carrying our bucket of flat rocks we'd picked for skipping across the lagoon. I vaguely remembered that I had a can of pepper spray buried somewhere in my bag, a gift from my ever-worried mother. But I knew I couldn't easily access it. As we watched the figure digging, a war raged in my mind. Part of me was still trying to come up with innocent explanations for what we were seeing. But another part, a more primal part, was tallying up our meager resources against the potential threat before us. It was a bizarre feeling. I'd never been in a fight in my life. I spent my days working with toddlers, teaching them about emotional regulation and conflict resolution. Violence was so far removed from my everyday experience that the very thought of it seemed absurd. And yet, here I was, mentally preparing for a potential confrontation with a total stranger in the middle of the woods. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. As we stood there, frozen in indecision, I tried one last time to rationalize the situation. Maybe this gut feeling was wrong. Maybe the man was doing something completely innocent, and we were letting our imaginations run wild. Maybe he'd feel awkward or embarrassed if he saw us, two nearly naked women spying on him from the bushes. But then a chilling thought struck me. What if the gut feeling was right? What if we walked past and he swung that shovel at us? What would the cost be if we ignored our instincts and they turned out to be correct? In that moment, something shifted. It was as if all the energy in the air, all the tension that had been building since we first heard the digging, suddenly crystallized. The situation felt charged, like a room filled with gas, just waiting for a spark. I glanced at my roommate and saw that all the color had drained from her face. She turned to me, the first words we'd exchanged since we'd heard the digging, and whispered, "Don't look, just run." We ran. We abandoned the trail, plunging into the underbrush, heading towards the water. Some part of my mind reasoned that if he chased us, we could jump into the lagoon. We sprinted through the woods, our bare feet pounding against the forest floor. We leapt over boulders, ducked under low-hanging branches, pushed through thorny bushes that scratched at our exposed skin. I was only vaguely aware of the pain in my feet, of the warm trickle of blood where stones and thorns had cut into my soles. The adrenaline coursing through my veins dulled everything except the urgent need to get away, to put as much distance as possible between us and the man with the shovel. We didn't stop running until we broke through the tree line, emerging from the woods near our house. Only then, as we stood gasping for breath on the familiar ground of our backyard, did I become aware of the state we were in. Our feet were cut and bleeding, our bodies scratched and bruised from our headlong flight through the forest. Later, as we sat on the bathroom floor, bandaging our feet and tending to our various scrapes and cuts, we tried to make sense of what had happened. How had we gone from our usual peaceful, meditative walk in the woods to this mad dash for safety? We had felt so at home in the forest, so in tune with our surroundings. We had developed a sense of invincibility, moving through the woods like silent ghosts, surprising other hikers with our quiet approach. But in the span of a few minutes, that feeling of safety had been shattered. As we talked, piecing together the events of the evening, a chilling detail emerged. My roommate asked if I had looked back as we ran. I admitted that I had, just for a split second, and in that moment, I had seen something that made my blood run cold. The man had stopped digging. He had turned towards us and started walking in our direction. That night, as we lay in our beds, the windows locked tight despite the summer heat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The woods that had been our sanctuary, our escape from the fear and uncertainty of the pandemic, had revealed a darker side. I found myself wondering about the man with the shovel. Who was he? What had he been doing in the woods? Was he a threat, or just an innocent stranger who had inadvertently terrified us? I knew we would probably never have answers to these questions, and in a way, that was the most unsettling part of all. The next day, we didn't go to the woods, nor the day after that. It took nearly a week before we ventured back, and when we did, we went fully clothed, sticking to the main trails, constantly looking over our shoulders. Gradually, over time, we began to relax again. We resumed our nude hikes, our meditative sessions by the lagoon. But something had changed. We were more cautious, more aware of potential dangers. We started carrying our phones with us, making sure they were fully charged before we left. We invested in a small first aid kit and always made sure one of us had easy access to the pepper spray. The incident with the man and the shovel had shaken us to our core, but it had also taught us a valuable lesson about respecting the wilderness and our own instincts. We realized that our feeling of invincibility in the woods had been an illusion, one that could have potentially led us into real danger. As the weeks passed and we continued our woodland excursions, we found ourselves more attuned to our surroundings than ever before. Every snapping twig, every rustling leaf took on new significance. We became hyper-aware of other people in the woods, always scanning our environment for potential threats. This heightened state of awareness brought with it a new appreciation for the forest. We noticed things we had overlooked before: the intricate patterns of lichen on tree bark, the delicate construction of spiderwebs glistening with dew, the subtle changes in the forest floor as summer slowly gave way to fall. We also became more conscious of our impact on the woods. We were more careful about where we walked, avoiding delicate plant life and being mindful of animal habitats. Our trash collection efforts intensified, as if by caring for the forest, we could somehow make amends for the fear we had experienced there. One day, about a month after our encounter, we were sitting by our favorite lagoon when my roommate turned to me with a serious expression. "Do you think we should report what happened?" she asked. "To the police, I mean." I had been wrestling with this question myself. On one hand, if the man had been up to something nefarious, shouldn't the authorities know? But on the other hand, what exactly would we report? That we saw a man digging in the woods? That we, two naked women, had spied on him and then run away without actually witnessing any crime? "I don't know," I replied honestly. "What would we even say? We don't have any evidence that he was doing anything wrong." She nodded, looking troubled. "I know, it's just, I can't shake the feeling that we should do something. What if he hurt someone?" Her words hung in the air between us, giving voice to the fear that had been lurking in the back of my mind since that day. What if our silence made us complicit in something terrible? In the end, we decided to make an anonymous call to the non-emergency police line. We gave them a vague description of what we had seen, careful to omit the details of our own state of undress. The officer who took our call seemed uninterested, making it clear that a man digging in the woods wasn't exactly a high-priority crime. After making the call, I felt a mixture of relief and frustration. We had done something, taken some action, but it felt inadequate. The mystery of the man with the shovel remained unsolved, a lingering shadow in our woodland paradise. As summer turned to fall and the pandemic continued to reshape our world, our daily forays into the woods became even more important to our mental well-being. The forest was a constant in a world of uncertainty, a place where we could forget about masks and social distancing and the ever-present fear of contagion. We continued our nude hikes, but we were more cautious now. We varied our routes and the times of our visits. We were more careful about being seen, our earlier boldness tempered by our experience. And always, we kept our ears open for the sound of digging. One crisp autumn day, as we were making our way back to the trailhead, we heard voices ahead. Quickly donning our clothes, we emerged from the brush to see a group of hikers gathered around a park ranger. Curious, we approached the group. The ranger was warning them about increased bear activity in the area. Apparently, several hikers had reported close encounters with bears in recent weeks. As we listened, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool air. Had our barefoot wanderings made us more vulnerable to wildlife encounters? Had we been foolish to think we could become one with the forest without considering all the potential dangers? These questions haunted me as we made our way home. That night, I found myself researching wildlife behavior and safety precautions for hikers. I learned about proper food storage techniques to avoid attracting bears, about the importance of making noise while hiking to avoid surprising animals, about the signs of aggression in various woodland creatures. Armed with this new knowledge, we adjusted our forest routine once again. We started carrying bear spray in addition to our pepper spray. We were more vocal on our hikes, singing or talking to alert animals to our presence. We were more careful about the snacks we brought, opting for sealed, odorless options. As the weeks passed, our forest excursions evolved. What had started as a simple escape from quarantine had become a complex ritual, a delicate balance between communion with nature and respect for its dangers. We were no longer naive wanderers, but conscious participants in the woodland ecosystem. The incident with the man and the shovel, while terrifying, had ultimately deepened our relationship with the forest. It had taught us that true appreciation of nature comes not from a feeling of invincibility, but from a place of respect and understanding. Winter approached, bringing with it new challenges. The bare trees and snow-covered ground made our nude hikes impractical, but we continued to visit the woods, bundled up against the cold. The forest in winter was a different world, quiet, stark, beautiful in its own austere way. One snowy afternoon, as we were making our way along a familiar trail, we came across something that made us stop in our tracks. There, half buried in the snow, was a shovel. It was old and rusted, clearly having been there for some time. We stood there, staring at it, neither of us speaking. Was it the same shovel from that summer evening? Had our mysterious digger abandoned his tool, or was this simply a coincidence? We would never know for sure. After a long moment, I reached down and picked up the shovel. It was heavy in my hands, a tangible reminder of the fear we had experienced. Without discussing it, we both knew what we would do with it. We carried the shovel back to our house and cleaned it up. Then when spring came and the ground thawed, we used it to plant a small garden in our backyard. Sunflowers, marigolds, and wildflowers, a riot of color and life, born from an object that had once filled us with dread. As I sit here now, watching those flowers sway in the summer breeze, I'm struck by how much has changed. The pandemic that drove us into the woods has waned, but our love for the forest remains. We still visit regularly, though our nude hikes are less frequent now. The man with the shovel remains a mystery, a strange footnote in our quarantine story. But the lessons we learned from that encounter, about respect for nature, about trusting our instincts, about the delicate balance between fear and wonder. Those will stay with us always. The woods behind our house are no longer just a place of escape. They're a teacher, a challenge, a reminder of our place in the natural world. And as I look out at those sunflowers, their bright faces turned towards the sun, I'm reminded that even the darkest experiences can lead to growth and beauty. Our barefoot wanderings in the woods during quarantine taught us more than we ever expected to learn. About nature, about ourselves, and about the complex, sometimes frightening, but ultimately beautiful world we inhabit. And for that, despite everything, I'm grateful. Growing up in Central Texas, I was always drawn to the outdoors. The rolling hills, the vast expanses of scrubland, and the scattered patches of forest called to me in a way I couldn't quite explain. Even as a preteen, I felt most alive when I was exploring the natural world around me. Our town wasn't much to look at, just another small dot on the map of Texas, where everyone knew everyone else's business, and the most exciting event of the year was the county fair. But on the outskirts of town stood what we locals proudly called the mountain. In reality, it was more of a tall hill, but to a kid like me, it might as well have been Everest. I had climbed this hill many times before with my family or friends, but as I approached my teenage years, I felt an increasing need for independence. I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe to others, that I could handle things on my own. So one warm autumn day, I decided to tackle the hill solo. I didn't tell my parents about my plan. They probably would have forbidden it, worried about all the things that could go wrong. Instead, I waited for a day when they were both busy with work and unlikely to notice my absence for a few hours. I packed a small backpack with water, some snacks, and a basic first aid kit. Things I had learned were essential from our family hikes. As I set out from our house, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The familiar streets of our neighborhood gave way to less traveled roads, and soon I found myself at the base of the hill. Looking up at the summit, I felt a small twinge of doubt. It looked much taller from down here, much more imposing without my parents by my side. But I squashed that feeling down, determined to prove to myself that I could do this. The climb was more challenging than I remembered. Without the well-worn path we usually took, I had to forge my own way up the hillside. I scrambled over rocks, pushed through dense patches of brush, and at one point even had to climb over an old rusty fence. Each obstacle I overcame filled me with a sense of accomplishment, fueling my determination to reach the top. The sun was high in the sky by the time I finally reached the summit. Panting and sweaty, I dropped my backpack and stood there, taking in the view. From up here, I could see for miles in every direction. Our little town looked like a toy model, the cars moving along the streets no bigger than ants. The patchwork of fields and forests stretched out to the horizon, and for a moment I felt like I was on top of the world. I sat down on a flat rock, pulled out my water bottle and a granola bar, and just enjoyed the solitude. Up here, away from the noise and bustle of town, I could think clearly. I felt proud of what I had accomplished, and for the first time, I felt truly grown up. But as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, I realized I needed to start heading back. My parents would be home soon, and I didn't want them to worry. I shouldered my backpack and began to make my way down the hill. It was then that I made my first mistake. In my eagerness to get home quickly, I didn't pay close enough attention to my surroundings. The path I took down seemed easier, less steep than the way I had come up. It wasn't until I had been descending for a good half hour that I realized something was wrong. The landscape didn't look familiar. The arrangement of trees, the shape of the rocks, none of it matched what I remembered from my climb up. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I realized I had come down the wrong side of the hill. I stopped, trying to get my bearings. The sun was now noticeably lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the landscape. I could see houses in the distance, but they weren't the houses of my neighborhood. I was lost. Panic began to set in. I had always prided myself on my sense of direction, but now I felt completely turned around. I tried to retrace my steps, but the unfamiliar terrain all looked the same to me. As I stumbled through the underbrush, my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Would I have to spend the night out here? Would my parents call the police when I didn't come home? After what felt like hours of aimless wandering, I finally came across a dirt road. It wasn't much, just a dusty track cutting through the wilderness, but it was the first sign of civilization I had seen since realizing I was lost. I breathed a sigh of relief. Even if I didn't know exactly where this road led, at least it would take me somewhere. As I started walking along the road, I tried to figure out where I was. Based on the position of the sun and the general layout of the land, I estimated I was probably 3 to 5 miles from my house if I cut straight through the woods. By road, it was likely closer to 7 miles. It wasn't an impossible distance, but with darkness falling, it would be a long walk. Despite the circumstances, I wasn't too worried. I knew the general direction I needed to go, and while it would take time and effort to get home, I was confident I could do it. After all, hadn't I just proven to myself that I could handle challenges on my own? As I walked, the sun sank lower and lower until finally it disappeared behind the horizon. The world around me was plunged into twilight, the familiar shapes of the daytime world transforming into mysterious silhouettes. The chirping of birds gave way to the haunting calls of nocturnal creatures. It was then that I came across the cemetery. In the fading light, the gravestones cast long shadows across the ground, creating an eerie landscape of dark shapes. A chill ran down my spine as I hurried past, trying not to look too closely at the weathered markers. Just as I was about to round a curve in the road, I heard the rumble of an engine behind me. Headlights illuminated the road, and I turned to see a pickup truck approaching. As it drew closer, I could make out 2 figures in the cab, a couple of young men who looked to be in their late teens or early 20s. The truck slowed as it neared me, and I felt a flutter of nervousness in my stomach. I'd always been taught to be wary of strangers, especially when I was alone. The passenger side window rolled down, and one of the young men leaned out. "Hey, little girlie," he called out. "You all right? Need a ride?" I hesitated, my mind racing. On one hand, these guys seemed friendly enough. They were probably just concerned about a young girl walking alone on a dark road. On the other hand, every safety lesson I had ever been taught was screaming at me not to get into a vehicle with strangers. In that moment, I made a decision. I shook my head at them and kept walking, picking up my pace slightly. I could hear them talking to each other in the truck, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. The truck remained stationary, its headlights illuminating my path as I approached the curve in the road. As I rounded the corner, I became acutely aware of how exposed I was. To my left was the high chain-link fence of the cemetery, offering no chance of escape if I needed it. To my right was a scattering of small trees, but they were too widely spaced to offer any real cover or concealment. I had just started to relax, thinking the truck had moved on, when I heard the engine rev back to life. The sound of tires on gravel told me they were coming around the corner. Panic surged through me. Why were they following me? What did they want? Without thinking, I bolted off the road towards the trees. In my haste, I didn't notice the deep rut running alongside the road. My foot caught on the edge, and I went sprawling face first into the ditch. For a moment I lay there, stunned. Then I heard the truck approaching. It came to a stop on the road next to where I had fallen. I held my breath, not daring to move. The grass in the ditch was tall, and the rut was deep enough that I was completely hidden from view. A bright light suddenly cut through the darkness. A spotlight. I watched as the beam swept across the trees and up the side of the cemetery fence. I could hear the men in the truck talking, but their words were muffled. "Screw this," one of them finally said, loud enough for me to hear clearly. The engine revved, and with a spray of gravel, the truck took off down the road. I waited until the sound of the engine had faded into the distance before I dared to move. Slowly, cautiously, I climbed out of the ditch. My heart was pounding and my hands were shaking. I didn't know if those men had meant me any harm, but the fear I had felt was very real. As I resumed my walk home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just narrowly avoided something terrible. The darkness seemed more oppressive now, every shadow potentially hiding some new threat. I walked as quickly as I could, jumping at every sound. When I finally reached the familiar streets of my neighborhood, I nearly cried with relief. I snuck into the house, relieved to find that my parents weren't home yet. As I showered and changed out of my dirty clothes, I made a decision. I wouldn't tell anyone about what had happened. It would only worry my parents and probably get me in trouble for going off on my own. But as I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I couldn't stop thinking about those men in the truck. Had they really been trying to help, or did they have more sinister intentions? And what did they think when I seemingly vanished into thin air? It occurred to me then that to them I might have seemed like a ghost, a young girl who disappeared into the night near an old cemetery. The thought almost made me laugh. Here I was, safe in my bed, and somewhere out there I might be the subject of a spooky story. That day taught me some valuable lessons about the importance of preparation and paying attention to my surroundings, about trusting my instincts when something doesn't feel right, and about the thin line between adventure and danger. I never went on another solo hike like that again, at least not until I was much older. But the memory of that day, the pride of reaching the summit, the panic of being lost, the fear of the unknown, has stayed with me. It was the day I learned that growing up isn't just about proving you can do things on your own. It's also about knowing when to ask for help and understanding that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit when you're in over your head. As the years have passed, I've often wondered about those men in the truck. Were they really just good Samaritans concerned about a young girl walking alone at night? Or was I right to be wary? I'll never know for sure, and in a way I'm glad for that uncertainty. It reminds me to always be aware, to trust my instincts, and to appreciate the times when fear turns out to be just that. Fear, not reality. That day on the hill, with its mixture of triumph and terror, marked a turning point in my life. It was the day I truly began to understand the complexities of the world around me. The day I learned that independence comes with responsibility, and that sometimes the greatest adventures are the ones we never planned. Now, as an adult, I still love to hike and explore, but I always make sure someone knows where I'm going, and I'm much more careful about keeping track of my route. And every now and then, when I pass by an old cemetery on a lonely road at twilight, I think about that young girl I once was, hiding in a ditch, becoming someone else's ghost story. The experience changed me in ways I'm still discovering. It made me more cautious, yes, but also more appreciative of the support systems I have in my life. It taught me the value of preparation and the importance of staying calm in stressful situations. But perhaps most importantly, it gave me a story, a personal myth of sorts that has helped shape my understanding of myself and the world around me. In the years since that day, I've shared this story with close friends, always prefacing it with, "You won't believe what happened to me when I was a kid." Their reactions have ranged from disbelief to concern to admiration for my quick thinking. But regardless of how they respond, telling the story always takes me back to that moment. The fear, the adrenaline, the relief of escape. I've often wondered if those men in the truck ever told their side of the story. Did they go home that night and tell their families about the strange girl they saw on the road, the one who vanished into thin air? Did my disappearing act become a local legend, a story told around campfires or in hushed tones at sleepovers? The idea that I might be the subject of someone else's ghost story is both amusing and unsettling. It's a reminder of how easily our perceptions can be twisted, how a simple misunderstanding can transform into something much more sinister in the retelling. As I've grown older, I've come to appreciate the complexity of that encounter. While my fear at the time was very real and justified, I now wonder about the perspective of those men in the truck. Were they genuinely concerned citizens, perhaps with daughters of their own, worried about a young girl walking alone at night? Or were their intentions less noble? The uncertainty of their motives has become a sort of Schrödinger's cat in my mind, simultaneously benign and malevolent until proven otherwise. This experience has made me more empathetic to both sides of such encounters. I understand the fear and vulnerability of being alone in an unfamiliar situation, but I also recognize the frustration of having good intentions misunderstood. It's a delicate balance, navigating between caution and openness, between self-protection and giving others the benefit of the doubt. The memory of that day has influenced my behavior in countless ways. Whenever I see someone who looks lost or in need of help, especially a young person, I'm reminded of those men in the truck. I want to offer assistance, but I'm acutely aware of how my approach might be perceived. I've learned to offer help from a distance, to make my intentions clear, and to respect others' boundaries. This incident also sparked a lifelong interest in local folklore and urban legends. I began to pay more attention to the stories people told about our town, about the strange things that happened on lonely roads or in old cemeteries. I started to see how easily reality could be distorted, how a glimpse of something not fully understood could grow into a tale of the supernatural. In college, I even took a course on folklore and mythology, fascinated by how stories shape our understanding of the world. I wrote a paper on the phenomenon of roadside ghost stories, examining how tales of vanishing hitchhikers and phantom vehicles reflect our societal fears and anxieties. My own experience became a sort of case study, a personal connection to the broader tapestry of American folklore. As I've shared my story over the years, I've been struck by how many people have similar tales, not necessarily of vanishing into ditches, but of moments when the line between the ordinary and the extraordinary blurred. A friend once told me about getting lost in the woods and stumbling upon an abandoned cabin that seemed to vanish when he tried to find it again. Another spoke of a strange light following her car on a deserted highway late at night. These stories, mine included, speak to something fundamental about the human experience. We are drawn to mystery, to the idea that there might be more to the world than what we can easily explain. At the same time, we fear the unknown, the potential dangers lurking just beyond our understanding. My experience that day on the hill and the lonely road home has become a touchstone in my life, a reference point for understanding risk, fear, and the power of perception. It's a reminder that sometimes the most mundane situations can take on an air of the supernatural, and that our interpretation of events can be just as important as what actually happened. As a parent now myself, I think about that day in a whole new light. I understand now the terror my parents would have felt if they had known where I was, the risks I had taken. It's made me more vigilant with my own children, more aware of the fine line between fostering independence and ensuring safety. Yet I'm also aware of the value of that experience, of how it shaped me and taught me lessons I might not have learned any other way. I want my children to have adventures, to test their limits and discover their strength. But I also want them to be prepared, to understand the importance of communication and safety. I've taken my kids hiking on that same hill, though we stick to the marked trails now. As we climbed, I told them a version of my story, emphasizing the importance of preparation and awareness. I could see in their eyes the same mix of excitement and apprehension I once felt, the thrill of adventure tempered by a healthy respect for the unexpected. Standing at the summit with my family, looking out over the landscape that once seemed so vast and unknowable, I felt a sense of coming full circle. The hill that had once been the site of my greatest adventure and my greatest fear was now a place of family bonding, of passing on lessons learned the hard way. As we made our way back down, following the clear, well-marked trail, I couldn't help but reflect on how different this experience was from my solo journey all those years ago. The path that had once seemed so confusing and treacherous now felt manageable, even easy. It was a powerful reminder of how perspective can change everything. That night, as I tucked my children into bed, my youngest asked me, "Mom, were you really scared when you got lost?" I paused, considering my answer carefully. "Yes," I finally said. "I was scared, but I also learned that I was stronger and smarter than I thought. Sometimes being scared teaches us important things about ourselves." As I turned out the light and closed their bedroom door, I was struck by how the echoes of that long-ago day continue to ripple through my life. The lessons I learned about self-reliance, about trusting my instincts, about the fine line between caution and paralysis are ones I now pass on to my own children. And sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind whispers through the trees outside our window, I think about those men in the truck. I wonder if they ever think about the girl they saw on the road, the one who vanished into the night. I wonder if they tell the story to their children or grandchildren. A spooky tale of a ghost by the cemetery. In those moments, I'm reminded that we are all part of a larger narrative, our individual stories intertwining in ways we may never fully understand. My ghostly disappearance is just one thread in the rich tapestry of human experience, a small but significant part of the stories we tell to make sense of the world around us. As I drift off to sleep, I find myself grateful for that day, for the fear I felt, for the lessons I learned, and for the story it gave me. It's a reminder that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones that don't go as planned, and that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to write our own endings. And who knows, maybe somewhere out there, around a campfire or in a late-night conversation, someone is still telling the story of the girl who vanished on a lonely Texas road, keeping alive the mystery that I know the truth behind. In the end, perhaps that's the real magic of such experiences, the way they live on, evolving and growing long after the actual events have passed into history.